All right. Well, y'all can go ahead and turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 3. While you do that, I'm going to go ahead and open us with a prayer. Lord, just pray for this time of study tonight that, as with Samuel, Lord, none of your words would be allowed to fall to the ground, and that this study would be effective in our learning, that your word would exhort and edify and encourage each one of us in our walks with you, Lord, and just that the knowledge that we build of your word would build our knowledge of you, and that would help us to grow in our personal relationship with you, that none of what we learn and none of what we do would be about religion, but it would be about relationship with you, Lord. Amen. Okay. So, young Samuel is at the tabernacle. When we left off last week, he was, as we believe, very likely around 3 or 4 years old, and his mother and father had left him at the tabernacle, and most of what we studied last week was about the worthlessness of Eli and his sons in the ministry that they do before the Lord. And it was talking about the fact that Eli's sons were committing adultery in the tabernacle with women who are coming there to worship. Yes.
Some of us are slow. You said First Samuel.
Oh, chapter 3. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, first. Yes. Yes, so Eli, the high priest's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are committing adultery with the women who are coming to worship and to serve in the tabernacle, and they are perverting the offering that's given to the Lord by stealing from the Lord and stealing from the people who are coming to bring their offering before the Lord. And last week in chapter 2, we saw that a man of God came to Eli and on the Lord's behalf rebuked him for scorning his sacrifices and honoring his sons above the Lord. And so we're going to start off in chapter 3 tonight. It says that the boy Samuel, chapter 3, verse 1, was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli. Now, at this point in the story, our faithful historian Josephus gives us the context that the rabbis believe that Samuel, at this point, when his ministry began, was 12 years old. And it is a really striking detail for us that the authority spiritually in Israel, as we're going to be seeing in this chapter and the one to come, the authority spiritually in Israel is going to be shifting from a 98-year-old man, Eli, who was the high priest of the Lord at the tabernacle, to a boy who was 12 years old. And he was 12, obviously, at the beginning of his ministry, and he was put in this position by the word of God, and he is going to be the prophet, the judge, and the priest over Israel after this point. So the boy Samuel is ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli. That's a really important detail, that Samuel was not at the tabernacle ministering to Eli and to his sons. The meaning of the word ministry or ministering or minister is important because it is in our culture seen as a kind of a position of authority or a position of leadership as a minister. But in the reality of the word, to be a minister means that you are a servant of somebody. So the Lord is letting us know that Samuel is his servant in the tabernacle in the presence of Eli. So that's an interesting thing, because Eli himself should be the servant of the Lord in the tabernacle, and Samuel, this boy, should just be, fulfilling roles, helping Eli and his sons to minister to the Lord in the tabernacle. But it's obvious that, yes?
You have a concept like in the beginning of this chapter, is he still at 4 years old? Is a little bit of time passed?
So, yeah, at this point, Josephus, the historian, says that he is 12 years old when his ministry begins at this point. So he should be somewhere around 12 or 13 years old. So this position of authority is kind of being thrust upon him. That's what we're going to be reading about in the beginning of our study tonight. But it's important to note that in the Lord's eyes, what is happening is that Samuel is taking this position of servant of the Lord in the presence of Eli, that Samuel is not ministering to Eli. He is not Eli's servant. He is not the servant of Eli's sons. Rather, he is the servant of the Lord, one who is actually coming before the Lord seemingly with a pure and true heart to fulfill the ministry that is supposed to be happening in the tabernacle on a day-to-day basis. So verse 1 ends by saying that the word of the Lord was rare in those days, and there was no frequent vision. So that is a situation that is dire for the people of Israel, because they are supposed to be a self-governed theocratic people. In other words, they are a people who is governed by a tribal structure and then a family structure under that. But ultimately, their king and their ruler and their leader is supposed to be God. And the priests are supposed to be the intermediaries between God and the people, giving the people the word of the Lord and communicating to the Lord on the people's behalf. But in this time, the word of the Lord, and that would be to the priests for the people, was rare. Now, that is not because the Lord did not want to speak to his people, but it was because his people did not have a heart to hear his words. They were hard-hearted against the Lord, and there was no frequent vision that was given either to prophets or to the priests in this time. And so this first verse is kind of setting the contrast to show how much things are going to be changing once Samuel steps into his role of ministry between him and the Lord. So Samuel is, as we've discussed before, he is not the first person that has prophesied words of the Lord. We've seen plenty of men prophesy, and women, for that matter, in the Bible up to this point. But when we talk about about a prophet, as we get into the books of prophecy, a prophet is one who is holding an office in Israel, essentially. It's not an official public office, but it is one that is given great credit by the people. And we're going to see even before this point, men who are prophets were called seers, because they had the ability to see between see through the veil between the physical that we all experience and the spiritual. And the Lord gives them visions of things to happen in the future, things that have happened in the past, and just information that they even need to know in the present. So Samuel is going to be the first in a long line of prophets that are going to ultimately be the ones who speak on the Lord's behalf to the people. So we've been in Israel, in the promised land, dwelling in it and subduing it for about 400 years at this point, through the period of the prophets. And in 1 Samuel here in the beginning, we are still in the beginning. I'm sorry, not the prophets, the judges. We are still in the very end of the period of the judges. And Samson, the great warrior, is the judge over Israel at this time, as Samuel is growing in favor with God and with man in the tabernacle. So at this point, it's very likely that Samson has already gone and... What's up?
I was wondering, how do you get, and probably already covered this, but how do you get who appoints the judges? How does that...
So each of the judges...
There's a prophet and there's a judge.
Yeah. So each of the judges, they more or less won the authority to be the judge over Israel by leading the people into a battle to defeat their enemies. Some of them were called by God, like Gideon, for example, was called by an angel of God to be a military leader. And once he, got an army together and defeated the enemy of the people, he then was given the authority to be judge over the people. And some just saw what needed to be done and took it into their own hands. But each one of the judges that we see became judge after they won a military victory. Yes. Yep. Yeah. And that's not going to be exclusive to the judges. Samuel does actually at some points lead the people of Israel into battle, but it's not nearly as common with the prophets to be a military leader as it is for for the judges, because in the time of the judges, there was the priesthood, which is not ever mentioned in Judges, and then there's the judge, which kind of rules over the civil life of Israel. And in the time of the prophets, there is a king in Israel. Samuel's really kind of the only prophet that serves for a period of time where there is no king in Israel. So, that's kind of the two ways that it worked, was a judge and the priesthood. And then the priesthood still exists, but, the word of the Lord comes through the prophet, and then the civil government is run by the king. So that, it's kind of transitioning forms from one to the other as we go through. So, okay. So I kind of lost track of where I was going before that, but we can just go ahead and jump into verse 2. So at that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his own place, and the lamp of God had not yet gone out. And Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. So at this point, it's evident that it is Samuel's responsibility to not allow the lamp of God to go out. So this is what we see called the menorah. In many other places in the Bible, it is a lampstand that has 7 individual lamps on it. And it is to be burning with, pure beaten olive oil in the lamps 24/7. So it indicates that this is happening sometime in very early morning, because that is when they would traditionally refill the oil in the lamp of God so that it didn't go out. So Samuel, this 12 or 13-year-old boy, it seems that he sleeps in the holy place, not in the Holy of Holies, but in the holy place outside of the Holy of Holies, so that he can awake from his bed and refill the lamp with the olive oil. So verse 4 said that the Lord called Samuel, and he said, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went to lay down. Now, the first thing that strikes me about this is, there's a few things that strikes me about it, but Eli must have been in the habit of needing help at night. He's a 98-year-old man, and even though in the tabernacle Samuel was ministering to the Lord, he was the Lord's servant, he was clearly there helping Eli as well throughout his life and through his old age. Eli's sons at this point are grown men, priests in their own right. They have families, as we're going to see, and they very likely do not live in the tabernacle the same as Eli and Samuel do. So Samuel was there helping to take care of Eli as well. And so we have no idea what or why Samuel thought that it was Eli calling to him, but I find it very interesting that the way in which God calls to Samuel. I would at least envision a voice of God calling out in the tabernacle to call somebody would be an earth-shaking or terrifying kind of voice. But that's evidently not what happens. It evidently is Samuel. He's calling him with a voice that very well could have been the voice of a man. And at that rate, it could have been, like a quiet voice of a very old man. So verse 6 says that the Lord called again, "Samuel." And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. So this is very interesting. At this point, Samuel is a young man who, in the reality of the situation, is in the tabernacle practicing religion, but has yet to develop a relationship with the God that he serves. He did not yet know God, and the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. That is what we're in the process of seeing. It is the call of ministry upon Samuel's life, ministry to the Lord, but this is the Lord revealing himself to Samuel. So Samuel is a young man who obviously had a desire to please the Lord and to follow the laws of God and to do the will of the Lord. It's really interesting as we're going to get into Samuel, anointing a king for Israel. I'm going to probably steal some of my future thunder here, but we get a description of Saul and we get a description of Samuel from Saul's servant. And the interesting thing is that the only description that is given of Saul is a physical description. He is tall, he is handsome, he is goodly in every way, but there is absolutely no description given of any character that he possessed in any way. And then when Saul and his servant are seeking out the donkeys, Saul's servant says, hey, there is a seer in this village, and he is a man of God, and everything that he says comes to pass, and he is a man of character and of virtue. These are not the exact words that he says, but this is the way that Samuel is described to Saul, who is going to be the future king of Israel. And so we never get a physical description of Samuel. The only thing that we think we might know about him is that he very likely had very long hair and a very long beard, because he was a Nazirite to the Lord from his birth. And as far as we know, he was until his death as well. So interestingly, we have Samuel and we have Samson, two men who are Nazirite to the Lord from their birth, but whose life play out a very different picture in service before the Lord. One who, in every description that is given of him, even by the people of Israel, when he is getting ready to retire and goes before the people of Israel and says, have I taken anything from anyone by deceit? Have I defrauded anyone? Have I done wrong to anyone? And the people of Israel themselves say, you have done nothing wrong to any one of us. So Samuel, throughout his entire life, the only thing that we're going to see about him that is anything but positive is that his sons did not follow in the way that their father led. And that is the major kind of failure of life that we see in Samuel. Although, as we're going to talk about when we get there as well, there's only, the parent has the ability to lead, to instruct, and to display a godly life, but they don't have the ability to force their children to follow in their way. So that is the character of Samuel that is laid out before us. And so he has this heart to please God, and God has chosen him from far before birth, all the way back to, seeing his mother and knowing his mother's heart, and, causing his mother to be barren for, all the years of her marriage, so that she would cry out to the Lord for a son to be given to him. So this is, just another step on the road to confirming Samuel to be who he needs to be for God to use him in a mighty way among the people of Israel. So verse 8, for a third time, the Lord called Samuel again, and he arose and went to Eli and said, here I am, for you have called me. Then, and I have this then underlined in my Bible because I think it is a little bit funny that it's taken 3 times. Then, finally, Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Now, I have no idea what it's like to be 98 years old. But, I do know what it's like right now to be 28 years old and have 2 young kids that are sick during the night right now. And it strikes me, and when I was reading this, that my wife will wake me up in the middle of the night and she needs me to answer a question for her relating to taking care of the boys. And any knowledge that I have in my mind is just non-existent at that time in the morning. And I just want so badly to give the right answer. And it's just not there. And so I can't give Eli too hard of a time for this, but at the same time, if there is any person in Israel who should be able to recognize the voice of God, it is him. Like, there is nobody that you could put before him in this. He should know the voice of God, and he should know what it is like to be called by God. He is the one who has the responsibility to hear the voice of God and to tell the people God's words. But as we saw in this time, the word of the Lord was rare. That means that it wasn't just rare for the people, it was rare for Eli. Because evidently, Eli did not have this heart to serve the Lord over his own son. So Eli finally perceives the 3rd time that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. So Samuel went and laid down in his place. So Eli is in what I would say is one of the most difficult positions that I can imagine somebody being in. A man of God has already come to him and told him what the Lord feels about him and his ministry, and his ministry before him. The Lord has said through this man, "Behold, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house." And goes on to tell him that the sign of this thing happening will be both of his sons are to be killed in the same day. The priesthood is to be taken away from him. And, and there is essentially, there's no hope for him and for his family. And so he is living with the knowledge that he is more or less under the curse of God. But he also has to be living with the knowledge that the Lord is going to raise somebody else in his place to fulfill the ministry that is necessary before God. And I would suspect at this moment, Eli is now realizing that if God is calling Samuel, God has chosen to have Samuel replace him and his sons in this ministry. Now, I would think and I would hope that if I was in the position of Eli, that God had told me exactly what I had done wrong before him and exactly why he wanted to punish me, I would be on my knees repenting before the Lord and seeing, the Lord tells us that the acceptable today for salvation is today. Eli probably still had a chance to repent before the Lord. Even if his sons didn't have a chance, he probably still had a chance. And yet he doesn't. And we're going to see that he has just a wacky sense of just giving up and not repenting before the Lord. So the Lord calls Samuel 3 times, and Eli has finally come to the conclusion, God is calling Samuel. He's not just calling him, but he's calling him to replace me. That is what God is calling Samuel for. Verse 10 then says that the Lord came and stood, calling as at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant hears." So the Lord has kicked the intensity up of this up a notch at this point, and he has come. He's not just speaking to Samuel, he is in his presence standing before Samuel. As we've learned throughout the Old Testament at this point, when it says that the Lord is coming and standing before somebody, when the Lord is physically in the presence of somebody, that means that, that the second person of the Trinity has made an appearance on earth, that Christ is appearing to Samuel and speaking with him. And he said to Samuel, "Behold, I am about to do a thing in Israel at which the 2 ears of everyone who hears it will tingle." Now, I don't know if any of y'all have ever seen, like just an kind of all-out Old West fight where there's not any rules. But, sometimes one guy will take his hands like this and smack the other guy's ears on the side and kind of pop his eardrums out, and it just disorients you and your ears ring. That is what this sentence means. God says that he is going to do something before Israel that creates that same effect of having somebody smack you in the ears, over your ears, and, it sometimes even pop your eardrums, but at the very most, make your ears hurt and ring. And so, God is laying this out, that what I'm about to do is going to be radical. It is going to really throw people off and make them question what has been going on in their land and in their country and in their temple, in their tabernacle before me. Verse 12 says, on that day, I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. And I declare to him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. So that is the sin of Eli. That is the only sin that is laid out before us of Eli. He knew it, and he did not restrain them. Therefore, I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever. So God is laying this out very strongly against Eli and against his family. And at a surface level reading of it, it makes you wonder, of all of the murder, the rape, the conniving, the evil, the destruction that we've seen people do in the Old Testament up to this point, why is God so angry with Eli and with his sons? What a lot of what the Bible is about is, in the beginning, showing the order and the design that God had for the earth, and then showing us the way that that has been perverted by man, and then showing us a path for man of redemption back to the order and design that God has made for them. And all the way back in, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, when we were studying the law, we talked quite a bit about how God was using Israel as a template, or kind of a example to the rest of the fallen world of what a society, what people could be if they followed God's order and God's design. And the people who were responsible for ensuring that and bringing people back into alignment with God's vision for them was the priests. They were the ones who were intended to maintain order and to show God's design to his people, and by extension to the rest of the world. So the sacrifices that are done in the tabernacle are supposed to point to things that have happened in the past and point to things that are going to happen in the future. The order that is supposed to be maintained among God's people, even all the way to the being clean and unclean, is because God dwells in the midst of his people. He even tells them that you have to, watch out for certain things not to do, because if you do them while I'm living in your midst, I will destroy all of you. And the people who were supposed to maintain that order inside of Israel were the priests, and specifically the high priest, going back to Aaron. And this is just a great example for us of the spiritual struggle that happens on a day-to-day basis. And it's kind of funny if we look at the words that Satan speaks in the Bible. It'd be like kind of the opposite of the red letter Bible. It's the words that Satan speaks in the Bible. He doesn't have any original ideas. Everything that he tempts man with is merely something that he sees God doing right in God's order, and he takes it and flips it around backwards and does it the other way. What are some good examples of that? Well, there is marriage as God sees it, and then there is homosexual marriage. It's taking the thing that God designed to be right and perverting it. And, there's just example after example after example of Satan simply taking what God designed to be good, perverting it, turning it around backwards, and kind of destroying the order that God meant to be in place. And we kind of see that with the priesthood that's in place at this point. They have taken the temple sanctuary, a place that is meant to be clean to the Lord, and they have perverted it by taking those who are to be the people, the daughters, the people of God, and lying with them, having sex with them in the sanctuary. That is a major, one of the worst perversions that they could do before God. And then the offerings that were to be given as a relationship offering with God, or even an offering that was supposed to cover the sins of the people, were being stolen by the priests, defiled by the priests, and even the blood and the fat that were supposed to be offered to God were being taken by these priests. And the order of the sacrifice that was supposed to atone for sin was being taken and turned on its head as well. Eli allowed his sons to pervert and revile the offering of God and the sanctuary of God. And what that led to was a society in which there was no right, there was no wrong, there was no doing what was right in the Lord's eyes, but there was only doing what was right in every man's eyes. Again, going back to the book of Judges, God says that they were doing what was wicked and evil in the sight of the Lord. So Satan is having a field day with the people of Israel. That's kind of what this is boiling down to. And, the question that I asked to begin this kind of tangent that I've gone on is, why was God so upset with the priesthood? And the bottom line, as I see it, is that he was so upset with these men because they had taken the order and the design that they were supposed to exemplify before the Lord, and they more or less sold out, to the design of Satan, and turned all of this holiness that was supposed to be before the Lord on its head and perverted it before him. And, the thing is that once they had done that, the Lord said that their sins could no longer be atoned for by the sacrifices. Now, why is that? I believe, number one, it's because, God is just. His decision is just, and, how can we argue with that? But secondly, they have made such a consistent habit of perverting and reviling the sacrifice of God that was to atone for the sins of the people, that God was no longer going to allow them or their family to use this atonement that they perverted to cover their own sins. So Eli and his sons at this point have been, put under a terrible judgment by the Lord. Not one that they didn't deserve, but even so, it would be a terrible judgment to hear this. And verse 15 says that Samuel lay until morning, and then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. Well, no kidding. I don't blame him, right? Maybe a 12 or 13-year-old boy speaking to the high priest of Israel. But Eli came to Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." And he said, "Here I am." He's built a habit at this point. Eli said, "What was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so to you and more also if you hide anything from me that he told to you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. And he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." Now, that is just astonishing to me that Eli is just willing to so completely surrender to the physical and spiritual destruction of his family. Honestly, I would say I don't even care if he thought there was a chance of God giving him mercy. At the very least, he should have been on his knees before the Lord repenting for the evil that he allowed to happen in his house. I have no explanation for this, why he was just so resigned to his fate. But all that he has to say is, "It is the Lord, let him do what seems good to him." And so Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. So that is an example of the Lord giving prophetic, utterance to Samuel, and Samuel speaking the words of the Lord, and the Lord confirming the words that he has given to Samuel to speak. And, when it says that not one of them fell to the ground, that means that everything he spoke came to pass. And we're going to see that later on throughout this book as well, and the next. So all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. And the word of Samuel came to all of Israel. So at this point, even before Eli and his sons are out of the way, the Lord has confirmed Samuel as his intermediary between God and his people. And Samuel is at this point speaking to, and I would say at this point, judging all of Israel as a 12 or 13-year-old boy. It is incredible to me what the Lord can do through such an unexpected vessel in this situation, right? Paul told Timothy not to let anyone despise or look down on him because of his age, because he was young. But, Timothy was not leading a church at 13 years old. I would guess that Timothy was probably maybe my age or maybe a little bit younger than me when he was fulfilling that role. I can't imagine the sense of responsibility that would be resting on such a young man. But at the same time, there would be no room to feel like an imposter in this situation, because God, the Lord, the Lord, appeared to him, called him, and confirmed him in his ministry. And I have a sense that that would put such a sense of humility in somebody, in realizing that none of what I am doing is about me. It is about what the Lord is doing through me, that he had confidence to speak his word, the word of the Lord, to all of Israel. So now we switch gears a little bit. So Israel goes out to battle against the Philistines. Why? Well, we don't really know. It doesn't say why. But at this point, the wild hairy man, he is still out running around killing people with donkey's jaws and lighting foxes on fire and just doing all of his stuff, creating enmity between the Philistines and the people of God. The Philistines at this period, during the time of Samson, they were oppressing Israel for 40 years. So, why particularly are the Israelites going out to battle against the Philistines? Specifically, we don't know, but it's just because they've been oppressing Israel for 40 years at this point. So we don't know where Samson is. We do know that through his entire story that's told in the book of Judges, he never goes out to fight with the army of Israel ever. He is a one-man show. And so, he may have been, up on his rocky crag looking down at the Philistines stewing. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But the point is that Israel is going out to fight against the Philistines. Now, at this point, archaeologically speaking, most archaeologists believe that Israel is still in the Bronze Age, and the Philistines, who are very likely Phoenicians from the island of Crete that have come over and established 5 cities or outposts in the area of Israel or Philistia, they are transitioning into the Iron Age. Now, I want to be clear, the Bible doesn't say anything about that. That is just what archaeologists say based on what they have found at these cities that they have found. All of the 5 named cities of the Philistines have been found and dug up, and they have iron weapons, and a lot of the contemporary areas, the tells, that's what Israel's all about. Everything is called tell something. And a tell is a hill or a mound that is covering up a city. Pretty much all of these hills in Israel have an ancient city that's buried under them. There are, almost uncountable villages that have not been dug up because they happen to be under somebody's house or under their farm or under a current city or whatever. So they just can't dig everything up. But the ones that they've found contemporary to this point have bronze weapons in them and not iron. So just kind of putting that out there seems to be somewhat of a discrepancy in the battle readiness of the Israelites against the Philistines. But at the same time, there also seemed to be a great imbalance of numbers between the Israelites and the Philistines. There was way more Israelites than there was Philistines. There was only 5 cities in Philistia at this point. They had surrounding areas, but it was mostly, the Philistines were a smaller people, but seemed to have much greater weapons and potentially even generals at this time, because Israel was very disorganized. There was no leader in Israel. It's interesting kind of comparison to the Civil War that, right up until the Battle of Gettysburg, even though the Confederate States had fewer men, they had, way lower, ability to produce things that were necessary. Their rail lines were not nearly as good. Pretty much, by any measure, the Confederacy should have been, just wiped out by the Union. But the problem is that the Union were not fielding good generals, and the Confederacy was. And, they had Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. And, right up until the Battle of Gettysburg, there was no explanation for really why the South was, really defeating the North more or less up until that point. And, it seems like as you look through history, the same kind of issues seem to come up a lot throughout this time. So the Philistines are ruling over Israel, which they shouldn't really have the power to do that, other than the fact that Israel it's not even divided. It's just scattered in its own land, more or less. And so at this point, the Israelites go out to battle against the Philistines. They encamped at Ebenezer, which it's interesting that it tells us that it is Ebenezer, because we're going to see a few chapters down the road in almost 20 years in the future that Ebenezer didn't even get its name until a future battle where Samuel names it in the future. But, he being the one writing this, he knew where it was and knew that everybody else did as well. But it's just an interesting fact. So they encamped at Ebenezer and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. So Shiloh is kind of up farther towards the north of Israel. And so the Israelites were very likely kind of gathering at Shiloh and going out to battle towards Ebenezer. And then Aphek was over towards the direction of the Mediterranean Sea from there. So they're about a 20 to 30 mile span between this whole situation that's going on here. So the Philistines drew up a line against Israel, and when the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the field of battle. And when the people came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines?" Now, that is an interesting way to put that, I think. The people of Israel had had a lot of experience in winning battles through the power of the Lord at this point. And it seems by the context of how they're saying that they believe that if they lost a battle is because the Lord wanted them to lose. That's what they're saying. Now, I did give some other kind of interesting details that in the physical, they should have expected to lose. But there have been so many other examples up to this point of the Israelites winning battles that they had no business winning. And so regardless of how you look at it, the Israelites realized that the Lord has defeated them or has allowed the Philistines to defeat them this day. And so they get a wild idea. They say, "Let us bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." Now, this is a wild concept that has never happened before in the history of Israel. Now, you might say the Ark of the Covenant's gone into battle before the Israelites plenty of times. Now, that's true, but that is because it was at the direction of the Lord, and the Lord was in the midst of it. One of the commentators I was reading for this had a great saying. The Israelites thought that they could go get God in a box from the tabernacle and bring him and have him win this battle for them. It is a really, my mind goes to so many different places with this. Like, do they think that if they bring God, what they think is bringing God between them and the enemy, that God has to give them victory so that he doesn't get in trouble? I just can't figure out what these people are thinking, other than that they have lived in a position of compromise with the gods of Canaan for so long that they see the Ark of the Covenant just like any of the other idols that the people of Canaan use at this point. Because that is how the people of Israel are treating the Ark of the Covenant, is as an idol.
Aren't they just doing what they've been doing this whole time? It's just thinking that their will can compel God to do things?
Yes, I think you were exactly right. Yes, the term that is used that they're,
we don't need God. We're going to use God.
Yeah, they're acting presumptuously.
It's not on God's terms.
Yeah, they're presuming, they're acting presumptuously, just like, the sons of Aaron did when they ran into the tabernacle burning fire that the Lord didn't ask for, and God wiped them out, fired them. It's one of my favorite jokes. Fired them. Yeah. So the people of Israel are treating the Ark of the Covenant as an idol, as a symbol. They're placing something in between them and God. And yes, they have no issue with doing this. And they don't even seem to consider asking God whether they should go to battle. They don't ask God whether they want him to be fighting. They don't even ask him to give them success. They simply believe that all they need to do is go get the Ark of the Covenant, which, it's good to remind, it's literally a box of acacia wood that has been covered over by gold. That's all that it is. The only, power that somebody might think it has just comes from the fact that for a time, God allowed his presence to dwell over the mercy seat. But that's the only reason the ark ever had any kind of power or authority. Or another way to say it is, it never did. It was just a box. And so the Israelites think that God is trapped in this box, evidently. And they think that this box, this symbol, has some kind of power. And, to be clear, it is holy to God. I'm not in the position to speak for God, how he feels about the Ark of the Covenant, but something that I thought was interesting was that in Korah's rebellion, God instructs all of these Levites who think they should be priests instead of Aaron to come and bring censers of bronze and burn incense before God. And he says, we'll see whose offering of incense is accepted. and God wipes out all those dudes, but the censers are still there. And what God says about that is that he instructed them to burn incense to him with those. They were used in the service of God, so they have become holy. And so anything that is used in the service of God, which the Ark of the Covenant was as well, is holy. So that is the very least that you could say about it. At the most, it is, some people believe it was so important to God that he, brought it up to heaven before the Babylonians, invaded Israel and destroyed the temple. I don't personally believe that, but, there's people that I believe give the physical Ark of the Covenant way more spiritual significance than it really has. But, it is not God encapsulated in a box as these people believe that it is. And so they bring it into battle as a symbol or as an idol, almost like the Romans would go to battle with what they would call an eagle standard for each of their legions. And every man in that legion would die rather than letting that eagle standard be captured. It was used to motivate the men to fight better. At the very least, that maybe what they're doing is trying to give courage to the men and, wanting them to fight better against the Philistines. But what we see in verse 5 is that as soon as the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all of Israel gave a mighty shout so that the earth resounded. So it got the guys fired up at the very least. But what else it seems to do is give them a false sense of security and power. Because when the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, "What does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" And when they learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "A God has come into the camp." And they said, "Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us, who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods?" ? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. So now it's clear, and it's not a surprise, that the Philistines do not have any kind of accurate conceptualization of what God is. They don't understand that. Every God that they have is a God that's created by the hands of man. Now, interestingly, the Ark of the Covenant was also created by the hands of man. So, they see the Israelites acting in a way that they understand because the Israelites are acting like them. It's a weird thing to see. They get it because the Israelites are acting just how they would normally act. And yet they don't understand that there is a God with power behind this. They seem to kind of believe it. And they've heard about what happened 450 years ago when the people were delivered by God from Egypt. But, it doesn't seem to mean that much to them. Someone says, verse 9, I assume a commander of the Philistines, he says, "Take courage and be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be men and fight." Now, I think that's interesting, and I like that, to be honest with you, because, the Philistines are just another example of a culture who has gone away from any knowledge of a true and living God. And, it seems as we are seeing in our society that one of the outcomes of that, we saw in, the fall of Rome, the Greek society a lot, that being a man, masculinity becomes something that is looked down upon. But, evidently the Philistines have not gotten to that point. He wants these fighters, in the King James, it says, "Quit yourselves like men." Now, to our mind, that sounds like he's encouraging them to leave, but apparently that's not what that means. It means to behave or act like men. And interestingly, it is the exact same thing that the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16:13, to quit yourselves like men and be strong, to be courageous, to be willing to fight for what you believe in. And yet this Philistine, kind of lays it out on the line. He says, "Do you want to be slaves to the Hebrews as they have been to you? If not, be men, quit yourselves like men and fight. Be strong." So the Philistines fought and Israel was defeated and every man fled to his own home. And there was a very great slaughter, for 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel fell, and the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophnius and Phinehas, died. So that is the fulfillment of God's justice against Hophni and Phinehas. Next week, as it is 7 o'clock, and I'm going to wrap up here, we're going to see God complete his justice with Eli. But we also see here that God is, he is fulfilling some justice with the men of Israel who incidentally bear responsibility, not as much as the priests, but they bear responsibility for their family's relationship with God. We see Elkanah and Hannah and Peninnah. They are coming before God and offering right sacrifices before him. And that was the responsibility of Elkanah as a man of God. And each one of these men who were in battle, we don't get a detail on every one of their lives, but it was their responsibility to ensure that their family also had a right relationship with God. And in this time, this transitional period that we're going through and the hundreds of years before that, the men of Israel were constantly defeated, and justice was served to them by their enemies at the hand of God, because they did not ensure this right relationship between them, their families, and God. So this is justice, and for tonight, the partial fulfillment of his word. And next week, we'll get into the death of Eli and what the Philistines do with the Ark of the Covenant after they get it. And I have to say, it is hilarious, and it's going to be worth being here for. So, it is really funny, honestly. So does anybody have any questions about anything we covered in this section of 1 Samuel tonight?
I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about the Philistines being in the iron, living under the Iron Age while the others were still in the Bronze Age. Because was it in Gideon's battle where it was explaining that they had to go to the Philistines to get their weapons sharpened?
Yeah.
Because
They had no blacksmiths.
They didn't. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
I hadn't connected that myself.
Mm-hmm.
Bronze versus what do you call it? Progress, technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
Technology, that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, those kind of things always interest me, and it unfortunately doesn't say anything specifically about it in the Bible, but it is still an interesting fact that is brought up through archaeology. So, anybody else? Matt, okay.
I thought it was really cool the very last verse of chapter 3, where it says, "And the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel and Shiloh by the word of the Lord."
Oh, yeah. Dang, I did not put that together.
The word became flesh.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, by the word.
Yeah.
That the Christ, that Jesus is the word of God. Yeah. I was going to get more into that, because we're going to get into some interesting stuff with the glory of the Lord departing Israel. And just, that's going to be what the wife of Phinehas talks about after she's heard all of this happening, that the glory of the Lord is departed Israel, and kind of the misunderstanding that the people have about what the glory of the Lord is, because she thinks that the glory of the Lord has departed Israel because the Ark of the Covenant is gone, and because Eli is gone, and because her husband and her brother-in-law are gone. And what she doesn't realize is that up until verse 21, the glory of the Lord had already departed Israel. He was no longer dwelling among his people until he came back to Samuel in this moment. And so, it just goes to show that the people are missing what's going on with God. That, she thinks that, the physical is what bears the glory of the Lord, and that has really nothing to do with it. And that, that the glory of the Lord had departed long before that. So we'll get more into that next week, but I am glad that you caught that. I did not even think about that being by the word of the Lord. That's really cool. All right.
I have something that I think is interesting too, right before that. You think about the time and everything that people knew must have been spread by word of mouth. All Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was a confirmed prophet of the Lord.
Yeah.
I just think that's really hard to comprehend.
Yeah.
And that would even mean anything.
Yeah.
Because of the time they live in.
Yeah, I remember when we were in Judges, there was kind of a question about like, how did anybody know that somebody was a judge over Israel? Like, how did that even happen? How did the word spread on that? It's like, Israel is really not that big, but it is interesting that, and there is like in that part, I think room for time to have passed from him, starting at 12 or 13 and don't really know how much time passes, but there is a,
Since Samuel grew,
yeah.
the Lord was with him.
Yep.
So, we have no idea how long that was.
Right. Yeah.
I just think it's, on our, they weren't texting each other.
Right.
I don't think it's-
Well, yeah, but something to remember about that is that that Samuel lived at the heart of Israel, and that according to the law, every person in Israel had the responsibility to come there at least once a year. Now that clearly wasn't happening, but people were coming and going from the tabernacle all the time. So it kind of makes sense how that word would be spreading all around Israel, and even probably beyond that, because people are coming. They're seeing the Lord working through Samuel there and then going back home after they have fulfilled their duty to the Lord. So, yeah.
I kept thinking the ages were so similar to when Jesus
Ah.
went to the temple.
Yeah, 12 years old, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Samuel, probably knowing that God had spoken and called, carried himself differently and
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah, what Jesus says to his parents, like, don't you know that I have to be in my Father's house? Yeah. Yep. Oh, that is a really cool thought. I had not thought of that, but yeah. There's not a whole lot of detail that's given in between here and where, where it says that Samuel is an old man and that he, has his sons as judges in Beersheba. It doesn't, it's only chapter 8, I believe it. Yeah, chapter 8. So we're really, the most of the life of Samuel goes by without a whole lot of mention. And then, there's a lot in the beginning and a lot in the end, but the in-between part, there's not a whole lot other than we know that he had kind of like a circuit judge thing that he did going from one place to the other. And, that's how he lived his life. But yeah.
I used to teach in our Sunday school, as little bit in children.
Oh, cool.
About Samuel.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And you would learn it, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's like we're going to see by the time Saul is anointed king of Israel that there are, prophets who are evidently, it doesn't say it, but they must have been, trained by Samuel, or, they are under Samuel, that, is going to ask if Saul is among the prophets, and that there's the sons of the prophets that speak to him. I don't think not literally his sons, but yeah. Yeah, there's definitely some interesting stuff to come. So, Lord, thank you again for your word, for your instruction, your exhortation. Just pray that you would, anybody that's sick, that you would get us all healed up quickly, and that anybody that's not sick, that they would stay healthy, and that we would all just be brought back here again safely and healthily and happily on Sunday. Amen.